like to thank the organizers of the Cannabis Science Conference for inviting me to speak. The other thing I'd like to say, I woke up this morning and my voice said I'm taking the day off. So we've been arguing all day, but hopefully you guys can hear me and understand me. I may not be as animated as I normally am. And then lastly, I'm modified. If you read the abstract, the presentation that I'm going to give is going to be a little bit different. All right. I put together this agenda, but basically what I'm going to do is talk about the similarities that exist between the tobacco/nicotine space and how the cannabis industry or cannabis space can leverage the learnings from the nicotine/tobacco space. So let's start with the products, right? There's a lot of similarities in the products, and you see the question that I had. Do you really think that regulatory requirements for product testing will differ between the nicotine and the cannabis space? I would argue no. Look, you have inhalable products, combustible products, you have oil products on both sides, nicotine and cannabis. Cannabis has ingestibles, nicotine, there are ingestibles, and then there's pharmaceuticals. Now, I'm not going to talk about the pharmaceuticals because there's a very clear pathway to put drugs on the market, regardless of whether or not you are a cannabis company or whether or not you are a tobacco/nicotine company. I would also say, and I'll start a little bit of trouble here, there's no such thing as medical marijuana. We can talk about that when I'm on panel. I've written an article on that. Please go to our website and check it out. So, first thing I want to talk about is policy. And one of the things you guys should know is that policy can be influenced by the actions of a few companies. In other words, a moral panic can be created. So let's take a look at what happened in the nicotine space. Basically what you see, and all you need to see is this graph, which is middle school and high school use of e-vape products. And you see around 2017, 2018, there was a significant increase in that. And because of that, your local congressman started receiving calls from schools and parents, and they had to act, which guess what? That meant FDA had to act. And at the bottom here, what you see is what FDA did. It was basically a de facto ban on flavored pods because they said this is what the kids are using based on their survey data, therefore these products should not be on the market. Actually, they pulled back their enforcement discretion, still a de facto ban. And honestly, it's been effective. Youth use of these particular products has declined. But guess what? It's like a feeding frenzy. Once the word got out and the moral panic had been created, everybody wanted a piece of the action. So the states decided to get in the game, but guess what? They didn't use the same language and they weren't as targeted. They decided that all flavored e-vapes are bad, and so they're working on banning flavored e-vapes regardless of the type of product. In addition to that, they can work faster, right? They can set policy much faster than the federal government. So it's very interesting. So stay tuned. This is still playing out in real time. So what about the cannabis space? What can you learn? Well, let's take a look at what's going on. If you look at poison control, and this is for Canada, you see significant increases in children or parents that are calling in because their kids are being poisoned with cannabis products. And that's under 6 as well as 6 to 19. Now, it hasn't reached the level of a moral panic just yet. I suspect it will. That's my bet. And you see the majority of the products where the kids are being poisoned are edibles. And I see a picture of gummies. Now, with the cannabis space, you're dipping your toe into areas where FDA already has authority for regulation. And you see FDA has actually sent out warning letters to people that are, quote, illegally selling copycat food products containing Delta-8 THC. So, industry could learn from what happened to the tobacco space. Nicotine, don't create a moral panic. So, what can we learn from a regulator's questions about cannabis products. Let's take a look. So what I have here is some questions from the FDA as well as CDC, and they have numerous questions. They're concerned that the research is limited on the potential harms and side effects of cannabis products. They don't understand the cumulative exposure, how people using the products. The concentrations of THC has increased over time with these products. What effect does that have on the body and the brain? And here they use a term called marijuana use disorders, basically addiction, right? More researchers need to understand the impact on the lung, emphasizing the COPD, lung cancer, to understand cancer in general, if there is an impact. And then, of course, there's limited restrictions on levels of contaminants. I know some states have some levels, but in general, these are the questions that they have. Now, they had similar questions for the nicotine space. And when you look at how nicotine is regulated right now, the Family Food Drug Cosmetic Act basically requires this list of testing for you to have your product authorized. It takes years to generate the data that I have listed here and millions of dollars. Let's just go over the categories. Chemical and physical characterization. What is actually in your liquid, or what are you adding to your flour, etc.? What's in the aerosol? What's in the smoke? Is the product stable? If you're putting a liquid into a device, is the device leaching metals into the liquid? What's the particle size? And then you have a toxicology and a risk assessment. Have you done a risk assessment on all of your ingredients? Have you done in vitro toxicology, et cetera, et cetera? It keeps going. Then there's human studies, right? How do people use the product? Topography, how are they puffing? PK, what's actually getting into the bloodstream, right? Are there any adverse outcomes from the use of these products? And perception, behavior, and assessment. When we were preparing for FDA, this is one area where the company that I work for, we didn't necessarily focus on. But this is a big area for the agency. And given that CBD, not so much, but THC is psychoactive, I imagine there's going to be lots of questions, and there are lots of studies that need to be done on behavior. And when you think about the population, there's still questions about intoxication and driving and functioning and et cetera, you know, I may have heard these questions. Well, if pre-authorization is required, you will be required to address all of these questions in your application, guaranteed. So when should you generate scientific data for a regulatory submission? Well, let's talk about the nicotine space. It was August 8th, 2016, when people in the tobacco industry, nicotine space were told, you have 2 years to prepare and put together your application. So the data package that I just talked about, 2 years to put that together. Well, through the process of FDA doing some interesting things and lawsuits and an epidemic, the timeline kept moving. It kept moving. And eventually the timeline kept moving so much that people were like, we'll never have a set date. We can wait. So a lot of companies waited, and guess what? There was a set date of September 9th, 2020. If you think about it, if people had started on day one, they had 4 years to put together a budget and stretch it out and generate data. But I can guarantee you, because I helped a lot of these companies, they did not. So what happened? They submitted applications that were a bit insufficient in terms of data. So let's look at the numbers. And when you look at the numbers, 26 million products were put into the process. 74% refused to accept. Let me explain this. When the agency refuses to accept your application, that means your product comes off the market. 74%. These are businesses. 70% of the nicotine companies, they're out of business. 20.6% of the applications of products, the agency refused to even file them. This is the second step in the process. So they've looked at the science and determined there's enough for us to file it and do maybe a scientific review. Then 4.7% received marketing denial orders. How many have made it through? 0.0001%. And those were all the big tobacco companies that made it through. So there's only been 31 marketing orders granted to these companies. Just stop there, let you guys let that sink in a bit. So what's the take-home story? There will be a deadline for cannabis product manufacturers to submit scientific data to a federal regulatory authority. I don't know who the regulatory authority is going to be, but they will set a date. And we're moving quickly toward this. And I think that the cannabis space, the cannabis industry can learn from the nicotine space and start generating regulatory sufficient might not be the right word here, but I'll talk about that, scientific data on your products now. That means robust, reliable data that you can submit to an agency to defend your products being on the market. With that, I'm done. I've delivered a message. I told you I'd do it in 30 minutes. I think the intro is longer than the presentation. And if you guys have any questions, we'll be on panel.